I accidentally discovered that my husband had been paying child support for years. At first, I assumed it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe an old debt, maybe a legal fee I didn't understand. But when I opened the document, my stomach dropped. The payments were labeled child support. Every single month, $850. And the first payment had been made 8 years ago. My husband and I have been married for 5 years, which meant that for our entire marriage, he had been secretly supporting a child he never told me about. But somehow that still wasn't the worst part. Because a few weeks after discovering those payments, I found myself standing in the middle of a crowded zoo, watching my husband laugh with another woman while their daughter held his hand. And a minute later, I watched him kiss her. For context, I'm 31, and my husband Michael is 34. We've been together for 6 years and married for 5. Until recently, I would have described our marriage as completely normal. Michael works in IT. I work in marketing. We split bills, take short weekend trips, and had even started talking about having kids next year. There were never any obvious red flags. He wasn't secretive with his phone. He didn't disappear for days. He didn't act suspicious. Which is why what I found that afternoon made absolutely no sense. I was looking for tax documents on our shared laptop. But while scrolling through our financial files, one document caught my attention. It was labeled, Monthly Transfer Legal. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a spreadsheet showing the same payment every month, $850. Always sent to the same person. It was Sarah L. At first I thought it might be a loan or some kind of legal fee. Then I looked at the description column. And that's when I saw the words that made my chest tighten. Child support. I scrolled up and checked the first payment date. 8 years ago. Michael and I started dating 6 years ago. We got married 5 years ago, which meant one thing. My husband had a child. And in 6 years together, he had never mentioned it once. That evening when Michael came home, I didn't pretend everything was normal. I turned the laptop toward him. Michael, I said, do you want to explain this? He looked at the screen. For a moment he said nothing. Then he slowly sat down and rubbed his face. I was going to tell you, he said quietly. That sentence made my stomach twist. Michael, I replied, we've been married for 5 years. I know. So, when exactly were you planning to tell me you have a child? After a long pause, he started explaining. 8 years ago, he had dated a woman named Sarah for a few months. After they broke up, she contacted him and said she was pregnant. They argued about it, but eventually he accepted responsibility. They signed a legal agreement. He would pay child support. That's it, he said. I listened silently before asking the question that mattered most. How old is the child? He hesitated. 7. 7 years. 7 birthdays. 7 years of a life that existed completely outside of mine. And, do you see her? I asked. Sometimes, he said. Not often. I stared at him. And, you never thought your wife should know about this? He finally looked up. I was afraid you'd leave. I took a slow breath. I'm not angry that you have a daughter, I said. I'm angry that you hid her from me. That night we talked for hours. He promised there were no more secrets. He said he only saw Sarah when it was necessary for their daughter. And although I wasn't okay with the situation, I thought maybe we could work through it. Unfortunately, that feeling didn't last very long. For the next couple of weeks, things felt strange. It was not explosive, not dramatic, just slightly off. Michael suddenly started trying very hard to act like everything was normal. He was more attentive than usual, checking in on me, suggesting we plan a short vacation together. It almost felt like he was trying to compensate for the secret he had hidden for so long. And to be fair, I was trying too. I kept reminding myself that people have pasts. Relationships end, mistakes happen, and sometimes life gets complicated before you meet the person you eventually marry. The child wasn't the problem. But something still didn't sit right with me. Mainly because small details in Michael's story didn't seem to match reality. He had told me he only saw his daughter occasionally. Just a few visits here and there. But after our conversation, I started noticing something strange. His work trips suddenly seemed a lot more frequent. One weekend, he said he needed to drive to another city for a meeting. The next week he mentioned he might be gone most of Saturday because of a client. Normally, I wouldn't have questioned any of it. But once you discover a secret like that, it changes the way you see everything. Every time he mentioned work, I caught myself wondering if that was really where he was going. I hated that feeling. Trust is supposed to be the foundation of a marriage. But once trust cracks, even small things start to look suspicious. Then one evening my phone buzzed with a message from my friend Emily. She sent me a screenshot. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was an Instagram photo. A woman standing in front of a zoo enclosure. Next to her was a little girl who looked about 7 years old. And standing right beside them was my husband. The three of them were standing close together like they belonged in the same picture. The caption said, "Perfect day at the zoo." And one of the comments read, "Such a beautiful family." My chest tightened as I looked at the name of the account. It was Sarah L. The same name from the child support document. My hands were already shaking when I opened her profile. And the more I scrolled, the worse everything became. Because that zoo photo wasn't the only one. There were dozens. Photos from birthday parties. Photos at parks, photos from beach trips. Photos of the little girl opening Christmas presents. And in picture after picture, Michael was there. He's smiling, standing right next to Sarah, looking exactly like a man who belonged with them. Then I started noticing something even worse, the dates. Many of those photos were posted on the exact same weekends Michael had told me he was traveling for work. Suddenly his story about occasional visits didn't seem believable at all. But the thing that disturbed me the most wasn't even the photos. It was the captions. They didn't sound like posts about co-parenting. They sounded like posts about a family. One picture showed the three of them sitting at a restaurant. The girl was laughing while Michael leaned toward her. The caption read, "Some things are worth fighting for." Another post simply said, "Family days are the best days." My stomach sank as I kept scrolling. Then I found a post from a few weeks earlier. It wasn't a photo, just text. It said, "Sometimes people realize who their real family is only after they almost lose it." The comments under it made my heart start pounding. One person asked, "Did he finally come to his senses?" And Sarah replied, "We'll see." I stared at the screen for a long time, because suddenly the situation looked very different from what Michael had told me. According to him, Sarah was simply someone from his past. Someone he only interacted with because they shared a child. But this didn't look like distant co-parenting. This looked like a woman who still believed there was a chance they would be together again. And I had no idea what Michael had been telling her. Did she know he was married? Did she think we were separated? Or had he somehow convinced both of us that we were the only ones in his life? That night, I barely slept. The next morning I opened Instagram again. And that's when I saw Sarah's newest story. It was a short video of the little girl laughing while feeding a giraffe. The caption said, "Zoo day with my favorite people." Under the video she tagged the location. And it was only 20 minutes from my house. My heart started racing. Because that morning Michael had told me he was going to meet a client across town. But now I knew exactly where he really was. I could have ignored it. I could have waited until he came home and confronted him. But instead, I grabbed my car keys. Because suddenly I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. The drive to the zoo felt much longer than 20 minutes. My hands were tight on the steering wheel while my mind kept searching for excuses. Maybe the timing was a coincidence. Maybe Michael had a meeting nearby and stopped by to see his daughter for a few minutes. I knew that was unlikely. But when you're about to confirm something that could destroy your marriage, your brain will grab onto any explanation it can find. When I arrived, the parking lot was full of families. Kids were running around with balloons. Parents were pushing strollers. Everything looked completely normal. Meanwhile, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I bought a ticket and walked inside. For a moment, I had no idea where to even start looking. Then I remembered the video from Sarah's story. The giraffe enclosure. When I reached the viewing platform, I saw them immediately. Michael was standing near the fence, watching the giraffes. Next to him was a little girl with dark hair, holding a cup of leaves. She was laughing every time a giraffe stretched its neck toward her. Even from a distance, I could see how excited she was. And Michael looked happy. The kind of relaxed happiness I hadn't seen from him in weeks. A few seconds later, Sarah stepped closer to them. She said something to the girl, and the child ran toward another part of the platform. Now it was just the two of them. Michael turned toward Sarah, and she brushed something off his shoulder. Then she wrapped her arms around him. My stomach dropped. For a second, Michael hesitated. Then he hugged her back. They stood there like that while people walked past them, completely unaware that someone 20 feet away was watching her entire life fall apart. A moment later, Sarah leaned closer. And Michael kissed her. Not a quick or awkward kiss. It was a real one. The kind you don't give someone you're just co-parenting with. In that moment, everything suddenly became very clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't complicated co-parenting. My husband wasn't just visiting his daughter. He was living another life. And I had just seen it with my own eyes. The strange thing is, I didn't confront them. I didn't walk over. I didn't make a scene. Instead, I quietly turned around and walked back toward the exit. Because suddenly I knew exactly what I was going to do next. Michael came home around 6 that evening. He walked in, put his keys on the counter, and smiled like nothing had happened. "Hey," he said. "How was your day?" For a moment, I just looked at him. Then, he started talking about his meeting. About traffic and client. How the conversation had taken longer than expected. Every word was a lie. When he finished, I picked up my phone. "Michael," I said calmly, "I went to the zoo today." And he froze. "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, I placed my phone on the table. On the screen was the photo I had taken earlier. Michael and Sarah. And the moment right before they kissed. His face went pale. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he sighed. "This isn't what it looks like." I almost laughed. "Really?" I said. "Because it looks exactly like my husband kissing another woman." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's complicated. It's actually very simple. You told me you only saw her occasionally, but what I saw today looked like a family." He didn't answer. So I asked the question that had been bothering me the most. "Does Sarah know you're married?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." That surprised me. "But she thinks things between us aren't great," he added carefully. "She thinks we might get divorced eventually." I stared at him. "You let her believe that?" He didn't answer. And that silence told me everything. He hadn't just lied to me. He had been lying to both of us, letting her believe he might come back to her one day, while still living a life with me. I stood there for a moment letting that realization sink in. Then I said the only thing that made sense. I'm leaving. That night I packed a bag and went to stay with my sister. A few days later I contacted a lawyer and started the divorce process. I'm not going to pretend it was easy. Part of me kept thinking about the little girl at the zoo. None of this was her fault. But I also realized something important. I could have accepted that my husband had a daughter before we met. What I couldn't accept was living with someone who had built an entire second life behind my back. About a week later, I received a message from someone I had never spoken to before. It was Sarah. Hi, the message said. I think we should talk. Curious, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop. When she sat down, she looked nervous. I didn't know things were this bad between you two, she said. I frowned. What do you mean? She looked confused. Michael told me you already knew about our daughter, and that your marriage was basically falling apart. For a moment, I just stared at her. Then I said quietly, I found out about his daughter a few weeks ago, by accident. Her eyes widened. You're serious? I nodded. Sarah leaned back and sighed. So, he's been telling both of us whatever version of the story works best for him. In that moment something strange happened. The anger I had felt toward her disappeared. Because it was suddenly obvious she had been lied to just as much as I had. Before we left, she asked one last question. So, are you really divorcing him? Yes. She looked down at her coffee, then said something unexpected. Good. I blinked. Good. She sighed. Because if he could lie to you for 5 years, he could do the same thing to me. For the first time, both of us were finally seeing the same truth. Michael hadn't just broken one relationship. He had broken two. Now, the divorce is almost finalized. My life looks very different than it did a few months ago. But sometimes I still think about that day at the zoo. About the little girl feeding the giraffes while holding her father's hand. None of this was her fault. But staying would have meant pretending that what I saw wasn't real. And I couldn't do that. So, now I want to ask you something. If you discovered that your partner had been living between two families for years, would you try to fix the marriage? Or would you walk away the way I did? If stories like this hit you, subscribe.